Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a good weekend. So today we are going to do our next installment of our Essay 3 Brainstorming video series. So we're ready to start our second part here. Okay, and so our goals remain the same as they were in part 1. But here in part 2, we are going to be placing particular emphasis on recognizing how we might use the exploration of dictionary definitions that we've been working on as a strategy not only to generate or to brainstorm, as we've been calling it, close readings, but also to refine them. And as we'll see, that language refine comes from our grading criteria. And as was our focus in part 1, right? Now that we're in units 3 and 4, we're looking for ways to move our essays into the B range and higher. And so refining our arguments would definitely be a hallmark of an essay that had moved into the B plus range and could certainly move into the A range. Okay, so where we left off at the end of part 1, we were continuing to explore this really crucial definition from Vargar, where she drops that key term that we're using in our prompt, high American style. And so the power of rereading here, right? So coming back and back and back to this quotation to uncover what it reveals to us about what she means by high American style, right? And basically how her entire argument kind of revolves around that particular style. Okay, so how does the word product, as well as the other words we pulled out of the quotation from Varga, regimen, escalate, stagnate, improve, help us to identify the ultimate goal and also fear of those who conform to high American style? So that was the question we had left off with. And so we're going to continue to work with our dictionary definitions, again, to brainstorm and refine our response. Okay, so just quick review. So product, right, we kind of teased apart the primary meaning of that word from its secondary meaning or its associations. So the primary meaning basically meant result, right? They're synonyms, and product and result. And the secondary meaning, something that is marketed or sold as a commodity, right? So manufactured good, consumer goods, and we incorporated that secondary meaning and that association into our close reading. Okay, and regimen, as you'll recall in our group work from Vargar, and then the video that was the follow-up to that group work, we close read her use of regimen rather than the more neutral word routine, and concluded that her use of regimen emphasizes, notice our close reading verb, the degree of control being exerted over women by the skincare industry, which has quote unquote prescribed, right? A regimen is prescribed, usually by a doctor, which has prescribed these skincare routines that require the purchase of expensive products, right? Okay, and just a quick review. So formulating these close reading questions that will help us develop close reading sentences in response, right? So always asking that question, why? So why has the writer made a particular choice, such as word choice? Okay, so now let's take a look at the words that we haven't looked up yet. So we focused on product and regimen. And so now we're shifting to these last 3 words. So we have escalate. So for our first interaction, so take a couple seconds here, look up escalate in a couple of online dictionaries and record the definitions and any examples that you think might be relevant for how Vargar uses the word in the quotation, right? So what might you pull out that might help you brainstorm a close reading? Okay, and here we're looking the word up in a couple of online dictionaries because as you have started to notice perhaps, even though the word is going to mean the same essentially across any dictionary that you look it up, um, different dictionaries have different ways of expressing that particular definition. And some ways might kind of get the ball rolling in your mind in terms of brainstorming close readings more so than others. So it's a good idea to look it up, two, maybe three. For our purposes now, though, just look it up in a couple. Okay, so pause here. Okay, and so based on the definitions and examples you recorded, would you say that escalate and the way that Vargar uses it has positive, negative, or neutral associations? And what clues do your definitions and examples offer? Okay, so here I just took a screenshot of a dictionary definition. This is from Macmillan Dictionary. And so there are two meanings. So the first, to become much worse or more serious, or to make something become worse or more serious. And we see our associations here. So our examples: the tension escalated until it became unbearable. Rebel forces have escalated the fighting. Escalate into, any one of these border disputes could escalate into war. Okay, and the second, to increase, especially at a fast rate that causes problems. So an example, an effort to control escalating costs. So for your final draft of essay 3, if you end up pulling out the word escalate, let's say, to close read, and using our template for close reading sentences that we set up at the end of part 1, these associations should definitely help. Okay, so as we saw in our screenshots, tensions, problems, war. Okay, so if the word escalate has these associations with tensions and war, what quote unquote war would you say that women are waging when they perform the new skincare regimen? So in other words, what we've done is we've used a dictionary definition to brainstorm a close reading question that we can pose to ourselves, to develop then a strong close reading response. Okay, so taking these associations and thinking, okay, well, when we apply those to Vargar's particular subject matter, what would this war be that they are fighting? Okay, so what's the war? And again, who or what are women waging this war against? And what is the war being fought for? Okay, so let's say we replied with something like this: women are fighting a war against their skin and fighting for perfect skin. Okay, so what we want to do now is to think about how we could take that close reading a step or two further, right? So in units 1 and 2, we were focusing on just making sure that we were having attempts at close reading integrated into our body paragraphs, right? To move us into the C and C plus range. And now we want to take those close readings another step or two further so that they're really effective and they lead to original insights, to use the language of our grading criteria. Okay, so to do that, we want to think about how we take them further. In our previous discussions of Vargar, we mentioned that her article is about skincare, but it's also about more than skincare. Okay, so what might women be fighting for that goes beyond the particular example of skincare? In other words, what is the bigger picture here? And examining that bigger picture will help us take our close reading another step or two further. And exploring the bigger picture is a helpful way to explore what our grading criteria calls, quote unquote, the broader stakes and implications of an argument. And we'll talk about it a bit here, but we'll do this more in depth in a workshop in Unit 4. Okay, and one way to respond to this question of broader stakes and implications would be with the overall notion of perfection rather than perfect skin in particular, right? So perfection is this larger concept, and skin would be a particular example of a quest for perfection. So, in other words, in waging a war against their skin, women who engage in the new skincare regimen are fighting a larger war for perfection and therefore against imperfection. Okay, so this larger war would include then things in addition to perfect skin, things that societal norms determine women should prioritize, such as appearance. So, for example, perfect skin, but also perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect body, etc. A perfect life, right? A perfect heterosexual relationship, and the list goes on. Okay. And so, again, moving from this idea of perfection and a focus on an individual woman and her skin to this larger picture of societal expectations, gender norms, that again helps us address the broader stakes and implications of Vargar's argument. And so, part of what we're getting at when we talk about broader stakes and implications is, why does her argument matter in the larger scheme of things, right? Okay, it's about healthcare. I mean, sorry, about skincare, but okay, let's say I don't do that. So why does this argument matter to me, right? So getting at that big picture. Okay, but first for interaction 5, we're going to focus in on the small picture before we zoom out again to the big picture. So in what we might call the smaller picture, how do individual women benefit from pursuing perfection, even though it isn't attainable, as Vargar points out? In other words, what are the rewards for disciplining themselves with regimens such as the new skincare? Okay, so first focusing on an individual woman and her motivations, and then we'll kind of zoom our camera lens out to the bigger picture. Okay, so one way to answer this, and this is always a good strategy, right, is go back to the text and look for a quotation or two that seems to resonate with that question. So here, as Vargar writes at the beginning of her article, it's normal today for people in certain circles to brag about spending most of their paycheck on serums. And that's right at the beginning of her article. In other words, if spending a bunch of money on skincare products gives women something to brag to others about, this suggests, notice our close reading verb here, that women are rewarded with attention, praise, perhaps even promotions, etc., for spending this kind of money on their appearance. Okay, so that would be an individual woman's kind of internal motivations, right? How she's rewarded by society at large by kind of fulfilling these societal expectations of her gender roles. Okay, but the bigger picture of Vargar's argument suggests that individual women aren't the only ones who stand to gain from such regimens. Okay, so besides the individual women who discipline not only their skin, but their bodies more generally, as Foucault puts it, right? So again, it's not only about skincare, it's about more than skincare, right? It could be about your teeth, it could be about your body, right? And beyond the body, right? Toward larger notions of perfection and perfectibility. So again, besides those individual women who are disciplining their bodies, who else benefits from women's pursuit of the unattainable goal of perfection? Yeah, and so we talked about this a bit in group work. So corporations, right? So whole industries such as the skincare industry develop around the pursuit of perfection. So in other words, part of the bigger picture of Vargar's article then, part of how it builds its broader stakes and implications, how it establishes itself, this broader sense of importance, are the ways in which women, thinking women, as Vargar ironically refers to them on page 1, unwittingly enable corporations and entire industries to make a lot of money off of exploiting their insecurities. And these insecurities stem from what is deemed the quote unquote proper fulfillment of societal expectations, such as gender norms, which for women prioritize the cultivation of a quote unquote perfect appearance. In other words, unattainable standards of beauty. However, as Vargar notes, the end product of a skincare regimen isn't perfect skin, but the regimen itself. Something that, as we've seen in High American Style, you have to steadily escalate over time lest you stagnate. Don't you want to improve? Okay, so in other words, let's return to this quotation using it as textual evidence to refine our initial responses to interactions 3 through 6 so far in part 2. Okay, and here just a moment to take a look at that part of our grading criteria. So here in the work with assigned text category, cites text to both support and complicate or refine thesis. So far we've been focusing on bringing in textual evidence, quotations, for example, to support our arguments. And so now we want to start thinking about strategies that will help us complicate those arguments or refine them. Okay, so here we're focusing mainly on refine, and we'll talk about complication in a later workshop. Okay, so as we work on using textual evidence to refine our initial responses, let's keep in mind this dictionary definition of refine. So breaking down what we mean by refine, what the grading criteria means by refine. So to improve something by making small changes, in particular, make an idea, a theory, or a method more subtle and accurate. Okay, in our case, what we would be making more subtle and accurate then would be our analysis and close reading of Vargar's language. So as we can see from the quotation, the regimen doesn't produce perfection. It produces itself. So in other words, it compels people to discipline themselves for the sake of disciplining themselves, for the sake of being able, as we saw from the quotation from page 1, to brag to others that they are properly disciplining themselves according to societal standards. Okay, so interaction 7. So with this in mind, what word could be used from the quotation above that would be a more accurate description of people's goals when they adhere to a skincare regimen than perfection? So which would be the more accurate word than perfection or perfect? Okay, so let's assume, and I'm sure many of you did respond this way, improve. So instead of, achieving perfect skin, the focus of the regimen is on improving yourself. Okay, and note here that Vargar has placed the word in italics to emphasize it, suggesting its importance, and that could be something that you point out in a close reading, right? So I'm imagining, because this is the only time that Vargar uses High American Style, which is the first key term in our prompt for essay 3, that this quotation is going to show up in everyone's final draft of essay 3, right? So we are definitely close reading the heck out of this thing, right? Giving you all kinds of options for how you could incorporate it into a body paragraph. And so if you would pull out the word improve, then that could be something that you take notice of, right? That would be close reading to indicate that, that she is emphasizing, close reading verb, emphasizing how important the word improve is by placing it in italics. Okay, so let's take a look at some dictionary definitions of improve to help us more fully develop our analysis of the goal of regimens such as the new skincare. So again, using those dictionary definitions to brainstorm and refine. Okay, so improve, so make or become better, and then our follow-up definitions here. So develop or increase in mental capacity by education or experience. So for example, I subscribe to 2 magazines to improve my mind. Achieve or produce something better than. They are trying to improve on the tired old style. Okay, so to make better is the definition that comes readily to mind when we hear the word improve, right? It's really these follow-up definitions that can help us refine our response and take it another step or two further. Okay, so this idea of improving mental capacity, improving our intelligence, and also achieving or producing something better than. All right, so let's look at the definition one more time and jot down the synonyms listed under similar that stand out to you, given what we've discussed so far about Varga's argument and its bigger picture, its broader stakes and implications. Okay, so we can pull out this notion of do better than, outdo, beat. Okay, so what do these particular synonyms that we pulled out here seem to suggest? Again, notice our close reading verb, right? So we're phrasing close reading questions, asking why, right? That will then prompt us to take our close readings another step or two further. Okay, so what do these synonyms seem to suggest about why people want to improve themselves in accordance with high American style? In other words, what do these three synonyms have in common? Okay, so sample response that we can work with and work on refining together. So these synonyms suggest that for Americans, right, because it's high American style, so for Americans, engaging in self-improvement regimens is a form of competition. In other words, Americans engage in self-improvement regimens not simply for the sake of improving themselves, but in order to prove that they are better than other people, right? So again, this notion of doing better than someone else, outdoing someone else, beating someone else, right? All indicate competition. And when we recall that Varga refers to the women who engage in the new skincare regimen as quote unquote thinking women, right? Who are persuaded by the reassuring scientific cast of this most recent skincare trend, right? So all the actives sound very scientific, right? So they're acids and peptides. So this sense of proving to others that you are better than them would seem to incorporate the association the word improve has with mental capacity. So that is one reason women might brag to others about spending a lot of money on scientific serums would be to prove that they are more intelligent. So in other words, that they have made better skincare choices than other women and perhaps have more money, right? So by setting up this notion of thinking women, those thinking women are kind of setting themselves up against other women who would by default be unthinking women, right? So there is this sense of competition reinforced by this need to kind of brag to others, right? To let them know that you're spending all of this money on these particular products. Okay, and here we are going to take a break. So looking ahead in part 3, the last video in our series, we're going to be shifting from examining the ultimate goal that drives people to engage in extreme regimens of self-improvement to the ultimate fear that reinforces this drive, right? And so that will bring us to revisit our responses from part 1, right, for 4 and 5, and see the progress we've made taking those responses further. And from there, we're going to work backwards from this goal and fear to determine the system of beliefs that underlie them and therefore high American style, all of which will enable us to tie together all of our explorations and close readings into a direct engagement of the language of the prompt, right? Really making sure that we have a clear sense of what high American style is, and that we have a clear sense of what the beliefs are that drive that quote unquote style. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to take the 3 words that Vargar uses to define high American style. And these are the words that come after, we'll look at the quotation again, but after the dash, right? So where she includes high American style. So escalate, stagnate, and improve, and use them to forge a connection to Ehrenreich to explore how the beliefs associated with high American style might be linked to Ehrenreich's conception of poverty serving as a trap. And again, that's the challenge of the prompt. So we're going to explore this link more fully in a discussion board activity, at the end of which you will have generated the raw material for a new paragraph for your final draft of essay 3, which you want to keep in mind needs to be 5 full pages long. So in units 1 and 2, the final drafts were 4 pages long. For units 3 and 4, again, those will be 5 full pages long, and that's to help prepare you for XPODs, where the essays will, through the semester, be 5 full paragraphs long for the final drafts. Okay, I will see you again soon.